Jack's Recap. Today's biggest headlines in 15 minutes or less.
On the line right now is the world famous Nicole Thomas-Kennedy, currently running for Seattle City Attorney. And before we get started, I have to ask you this question. Have you heard of this thing called Twitter? Have you heard of this new thing out there called Twitter where people...
Yeah, maybe it sounds familiar.
So you are under a tremendous amount of scrutiny for some of the tweets that you've made over the last, let's say, couple of years. And I wanted to have you on the show so maybe we could figure out when you're taken out of context and what you actually mean with some of these tweets.
Sure.
So to begin with, I just want to ask, because I always have appreciation for true believers. Like, I always have appreciation for people that just say, this is what I've said in the past and this is what I stick by. Are you still full ACAB? Is that still a belief that you have, or have you walked that back at this point?
No, well, so ACAB is in response to the system of policing.
Yeah.
It's not, and yes, I still believe that the system of policing is inherently racist.
See, and I appreciate that in the sense that my concern was that you were going to walk it back and say, oh, no. When I was a youth, I was just tweeting crazy stuff out there. But I found that in politics now, I have so much more appreciation for people that are just like, yeah, I own it. You know, this is the way that I feel and this is the way that I am. And even though I might disagree with you on it, I still respect it. Do you know what I mean? I still respect you saying that. So in reference to that, on the 25th of 2020, in reference to the explosive device at the East Precinct, you said that the person who put that there was a hero. Do you still feel that way?
So there's a lot of irony and sarcasm on Twitter.
Yeah.
And a lot of my tweets at that time were kind of about pushing buttons. And so that's what, and also at the same time, SPD was continuously posting these tweets that were kind of lying about what was going on. So first, I didn't really think that it might be entirely true. And second, I knew that it would make people mad if I posted that, particularly the people that would tweet at me like cops should use live rounds or all protesters should be gassed.
Oh, I see.
So it was speaking back to that.
So it was kind of like, if other people are going to be rude and cruel and vitriolic, then I'm going to fight fire with fire, and I'm going to be like crude, and I'm going to basically say the same thing, right? Like, I'm going to say that violence is acceptable to a certain degree, but also be sarcastic at the same time.
No, because what I was speaking back to was the fact that people were out in the street demanding justice for racist police killings.
Okay.
And what was being focused on was property damage. And that was getting used as sort of this scapegoat for these protests in saying that, you know, all the protests were violence. This is what was happening. And in many ways, equating damage to property with loss of human life. And that is what I found extremely offensive. And that is what I was speaking back to, as well as the fact that SPD was being incredibly brutal to the residents of this city and was lying about why they were doing that on Twitter.
Hey, listen, I agree with you when it comes to the CS gas. And I've said this, every time it comes up when the Seattle protests from a couple summers ago come up, I always say, I hate to see my fellow citizens under attack with military-grade weaponry. Like, CS gas is such an extreme thing to use. I totally agree with it. But my thing is that I wouldn't want to tweet something out about people actually getting harmed, right? I mean, I feel like that's where the line is. And you might think that it's funny, but I don't necessarily think that violence in that way is funny. I mean, an officer was hurt from that explosion, correct?
I don't know if that's true. And so I was not tweeting about an officer getting hurt. I was tweeting about property. Okay.
So when you tweeted out property damage or property destruction is a moral imperative, is that still a joke?
Yeah, it's sarcasm. It's, again, speaking back to people who are saying that protesters should be killed for... I mean, so the narrative was that, so people are in the street. protesting police murders, and occasionally there would be some property damage. And then people on social media in particular would say those people deserve to be killed for damaging property. And so I was being deliberately inflammatory and in speaking back to that. So do I think that we should walk around destroying each other's property? No. But I think that to me, it was just demonstrating. So like people would say, well, people matter more than property. I'm like, well, then why are you saying people should be killed if they damage property? And then people say, well, if you touch my property, I'll kill you. Like, it's just this like never ending cycle of illogic that elevates property over people.
Yeah, but like lots of people say mean stuff about me on my radio show, right? Like I get death threats and people say that I should be shot, but I don't go to social media and post like screenshots of it and say, somebody find this person. You know what I mean? I don't, even if it's intended to be sarcastic, I still think that engaging in that kind of violent rhetoric, especially when you're running for a position of such high import in the city of Seattle, like it just seems kind of childish and kind of vindictive and cruel in so many ways. And that's what concerns me when I read stuff like on the 25th of July, when you said that that the hero, you said, yay, thank you to the heroes that set the children's jail on fire. Like, I don't think that children's detention centers are a good idea, but I also don't think that arson is something to be celebrated, right?
Twitter is an inherently satirical and sarcastic forum. I was not a candidate when I tweeted those things.
Right.
Will I tweet those things as a candidate? No, I will not. But Trump was president. Cops were brutalizing everybody on the street. And yeah, I said some mean and sarcastic things on Twitter as a citizen. And I defend the right of any citizen to say mean, sarcastic things on Twitter.
Sure, but like now you're going to be a policy person. So do you now think that, you know, you're going to be the person, right? You're going to be the guy. You're going to be the Seattle attorney. Do you think that maybe you should walk some of these statements back publicly and say arson is bad, explosions are bad, harming cops is bad, police officers aren't actually pigs? I mean, don't you think that maybe you should come out and say something to that effect so that people know that you've walked that back? Or are you going to keep doing the, well, it was because I'll give you an example. If I tweeted out rape is a moral imperative and I got fired for it, and then I said, hey, that was just a joke, is that still an acceptable excuse to make?
Listen, these tweets are a distraction. As I've said over and over, sarcasm, irony, that's what Twitter is rife with. And when I tweet things out, I punch up. Yeah. I don't punch down.
Okay.
We are free to speak back to power. And that's all there is to it, you know? And I'll say during those protests, I had to buy a gas mask for my 9-year-old to use in my home. And so was I angry? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I had every right to be. And so, you know, and I don't know how many times I can say it, but as a city attorney, will I tweet those things? No. I'm also a trial lawyer.
Right.
I don't talk about that when I'm in court.
I got to say this, you know, NTK, I appreciate your consistency on this. If I, and I mean that in all sincerity, like I legitimately thought that you were going to be walking it back and being all apologetic. But I think in today's politics, it's very refreshing to talk to somebody like you who's like, you know, this is just the way that I feel about it. My other question would be, you've said, you know, misdemeanors, I'm not going to be prosecuting like, I forget the number that you said, but like 80% of misdemeanors or something like that. How many crimes of poverty committed by the same person would warrant prosecution? So if someone just keeps going into a pharmacy or whatever and stealing from said pharmacy, how many times would someone be a repeat offender before you say to yourself as a city attorney, you know what, I actually now have to put this person through the legal system?
You know, I think when we're talking about prolific offenders, there is really nothing that illustrates the inherent folly and absurdity of the system of prosecution more than a repeat offender. You know, so there are people who do repeatedly commit crimes or steal or shoplift? Yes, there is. And by continually prosecuting them, charging them, putting them through the jail, it has been shown to be a complete waste of taxpayer money. So my focus is not on, should we waste all this money prosecuting people? My focus is on, how do we get to the root of the problem so it doesn't keep happening? Because clearly prosecuting people and putting them in jail over and over and over is not deterring that behavior. So why waste taxpayer dollars doing that?
So what would be because I happen to agree with you, right? So what would be the alternative treatment plan for someone, who's like a heroin addict who keeps going into a Bartell's and steals a bunch of Monster energy drinks, or like how we saw in Chicago, how people are going into Macy's and stealing perfume, or San Francisco, how people are going into Walgreens and stealing. What would your alternative to that be?
I mean, it depends on the person. And that's the thing. Right now, we take a one-size-fits-all approach to how we deal with different types of things. And I would like to have a much more nuanced approach to that. I think there's a lot of alternatives out there. I mean, I could go into them, but it would be a long time. But I encourage you to go to my website, ntkforjustice.com. And there's lots of things laid out on my platform about alternatives to things that we can do.
So let's just say it's me. I'm Jack Stine, world famous radio host, and I keep going into a CVS, and about once a week I go in there and I steal $400 worth of stuff, and then I come out, and let's just say I do it once a week for 6 months. At what point in time do you intervene in my life, right? What do you do for me? I'm 33 years old, and I keep going and I keep stealing $400 worth of perfumes. What do you do for me?
Well, first I would say, if you've gone in twice and stole $400 worth of perfume, that's no longer a misdemeanor.
Okay.
That is a felony. So at that point, that would be the county prosecutor's issue. But I also want to point out that the thing that you're talking about is not what's dealt with at Seattle Municipal Court. At Seattle Municipal Court, it's not the people being prosecuted for theft are by and large extremely poor. 90% of the defendants that are in that court are too poor to afford a lawyer and are appointed a public defender. I mean, we really are only prosecuting almost exclusively the poor in that court. And so when we look at problems like, stealing a sandwich or a block of cheese and a beer or something like that, and it keeps happening, that's an indication that there's a societal problem and an underlying issue that needs to be addressed. Because if someone's doing that, repeat, that means that the problem, and they've been prosecuted before and they've been put in jail before, and it doesn't seem to deter anything, then that's a problem we need to deal with in a different way. And the city attorney only has the ability to prosecute misdemeanors. The maximum sentence on a misdemeanor is less than a year in jail. There's just no way that continually prosecuting people for misdemeanors when they're doing it over and over again is an adequate solution to the problem.
So for all like my fellow drug addicts out there who say, the time that I was arrested and I got put in jail for 3 months or 6 months changed my life, are you saying that would be, for all the people out there with real life experience who say that this legitimately turned my life around? What would you say to that? I mean, for many people, that's what it takes. It takes a certain amount of resistance. It takes actually having to go to jail to realize the consequences of your actions. Would you say, no, not so much? Like, this is not something that we want to use to try to rehabilitate people in any way, shape, or form?
So there is no rehab in jail. We're talking about jail. We're not talking about prison.
Sure.
There's no programming. There's no recovery programs. There's nothing like that. And are there people who have benefited from that? I guess so. It's out. Yes. And I've talked to people like that, but it's usually people who have been through the system multiple times. That is a small cross-section of the people that are actually being swept up in this way. And so there's tons of data out there that shows that things like jail, forced detox, forced treatment are utter failures in the bigger picture. So the amount of people that respond well to that is about the same amount of people who are put off recovery or detox for a much longer time because they were forced to do something that they weren't ready to do. So recovery takes willingness. That's the first. We can't keep people in jail or put people through forced treatment and say, now I'm ready for you to get clean. It's a personal addiction. And so there needs to be a heavy amount of personal commitment to overcoming those problems.
Yeah, I mean, I just got to tell you, like, as a former heroin addict, one of the things that benefited me the most was people just saying you're at your limit and you got to get clean, otherwise you're going to go to jail, right? I mean, that was the limit for me.
Yeah, but I feel like that's everywhere in society. You know what I mean? By the time someone is, unsheltered, living on the street and shooting heroin, they've been told that many times before.
Yeah, and then eventually it sticks is what I'm trying to say. Like, I was that dude, right? And then I was pill shopping, and then a doctor said, listen, you're going to die in 6 months. I'm not going to give you any dope. And then I went, okay. So I went to the hospital and I said, I'm trying to get sober. Can you help me? Right? So people just kept saying no and no and no and no and no. And then I finally was able to do it on my own. Like, I was right up against the system, and I didn't want to go to jail, and I didn't want to die. So, you know what I mean? Like, at a certain point in time, when you present people with limits to their behavior, they respond to it. And most people respond well. I mean, ask anybody at an NA meeting or an AA meeting, what was the thing that really woke them up? Something like, 75% of them are like, oh, I got pulled over, I got arrested, blah, 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 blah.
So what I'm hearing is you didn't go to jail, and that's what woke you up from your addiction problem. Like, that's not what happened for you.
No, I'm saying that I had enough people saying, no, you cannot continue this behavior. And my concern would be that you not doing your job would facilitate people diving further into their addiction because you're effectively coddling them, right? You're saying that there are no consequences for your behavior.
Well, addiction isn't illegal, first of all. And I think there's, like you said, there's plenty of people in society that are telling people, like, that's the limit. Addiction isn't a choice.
I beg to differ. I bet, as a heroin addict, I was making a lot of choices to keep doing heroin. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, I'm an alcoholic in recovery as well. And being in recovery was a choice for me, but it took my personal willingness to recover. And so, but when I was in the throes of addiction, I felt like I didn't have control. And everybody telling me, stop. Like, I wanted to stop. I couldn't. And I had to get to the point where I was like, had the wherewithal to do it. And it's not because, that's just like what works for one person doesn't work for all people.
Sure.
And what we know is that jail and forced treatment doesn't work for most people. So, even in your case, there was no jail and no forced treatment, and you went and got help on your own and got clean.
I wouldn't necessarily say on my own. I was kind of forced into it. But I'll tell you this, NTK, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you being so honest and so willing to have the conversation. And I even more so, I appreciate you not walking anything back. And so my sincerest hope is that if you do get elected, that you continue to come back on the show and we can have our fun little debates and we can have our fun little back and forth. Because I've really, really enjoyed this, and I really, really appreciate you coming on. Oh, one last question. Would you debate my very good friend Jason Rantz? Would you ever go on Jason Rantz's show, or are you not interested in doing that?
I mean, that sounds pretty fun. I might do that.
Jason is a real peach, if I can say that. Jason is a real peach of a guy, and I think that you guys would have a lot of fun, and we could, this whole conversation around Seattle and what's happening in the city and what do we got to do about it. I love the fact that you're willing to engage with it, and I sincerely appreciate your time. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Have a good day.
That was the world famous Nicole Thomas-Kennedy.